Welcome to 30 Minutes of Wisdom, Rising in Consciousness and Mindfulness. I'm Veronica Carrera, the creator and the producer of the show. 30 Minutes of Wisdom is about rising in consciousness and connecting to your authentic self. To help us persevere through these uncertain times, we have created conversations that are rooted in wisdom and higher consciousness. And today's topic, leading through crisis, will leave you feeling more connected, inspired, and empowered. But first, let me introduce you to my wonderful co-host, the one and only Lonnie Olasavi.
Hello, thank you so much, Veronica, and hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you all. My name is Lani Olazaba. I am Director of Inclusion Recruiting at LinkedIn and also the proud co-chair of our employee resource group. Hola, mi gente. I'm very grateful to be here with all of you and everyone, and great to have this experience.
Thank you. Thank you, Lonnie. So this is a moment that all of you have been waiting for. It is with great honor and privilege to introduce to you to two phenomenal leaders, Dan Doctoroff, founder and CEO of Sidewalk Labs and former CEO of Bloomberg LP, and Dan Shapero, LinkedIn's Chief Business Officer. Welcome, Dan.
Hi,
thank you for having me here.
No, so great to have you. So why don't we just get started? People are anxiously waiting.
Awesome. So I thought about how we'd navigate this conversation. And the first challenge was, you're both Dans. So how was I going to navigate the Dan scenario here? So I thought about Daniel, Danny, Danielson, for those Karate Kid fans. And I know I just aged myself there. So, but how about Dan D and Dan S? Are we good with that?
I can deal with that.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. So on a bit of a more serious note, the challenging times that we're in right now, the uncertainties have been so many. And, I think that we can all agree that there really hasn't been a playbook. There was no, a notion that this was going to happen, no playbook on how to respond. Also, though, however, with myself, I'm a firm, the glass is half full, optimistic thinker. I firmly believe that with every crisis, there's an opportunity to redefine who we are. There's an opportunity to redefine what we want, who we want to become. As leaders, there's an ultimate opportunity to really define how we want to show up with compassion, vulnerability, grit, and all of those things that humanity needs. I have experienced the utter need to be more, firsthand focused and more aware in my life as a leader. One of the reasons why I appreciate this space, Veronica, for creating mindfulness and consciousness. So really the question is, and I'd love to start with you, Dan D. There is no doubt that this year has shaken us all personally, individually, and collectively. What has been the most significant challenge for you in this past year, and how did you gain strength to overcome and thrive?
Well, the biggest challenge for me is, I'm leading a startup company. We actually are all focused on engaging in the physical environment, trying to bring innovation to the physical environment. When you can't really engage together or in the physical environment, it's really hard. And so, ensuring that people understand that this will end, that we have a responsibility to continue to do our work, that when this is over and even through it, the solutions that we offer can really help to address some of the really important issues that in particular our cities are struggling with, I think has to a large extent unified people around sort of a common goal. Always elevating toward that common goal that people can rally around is the most important thing to do during a crisis.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I love the mention of the solutionizing in this time and coming together and being able to collectively come up with ideas and move us forward and look beyond the circumstances that we're facing now.
It's funny when I think back on my career, it sort of has been shaped in many ways by major crises. When I became the deputy mayor of New York right after 9/11. And so my job was to help rebuild New York after 9/11. And people really wondered at that time kind of how would New York recover. It was sort of devastated emotionally, financially, at least in part of New York, physically. And then I left the city and went to run Bloomberg LP, literally, which is where I met Veronica, right before the financial crisis. Again, right after I started, like one after another of our largest clients were melting down. And so, again, my experience has always said that it's focusing on sort of the longer term, focusing on what you uniquely contribute, and rallying people around the importance of what we do in order to kind of make life better, not just for ourselves, but for others.
Absolutely. Yeah, couldn't agree more. And resilience is a superpower, that's for sure. What about you, Dan S?
The most challenging part of the year. Well, I think that, at least I find that the hardest part sometimes about being a leader, particularly in crisis, is that leadership is about serving the organization. It's about serving your team. It's about helping others be successful. And doing that when you yourself are going through so much personally is hard. And if I think about my own experience, I know this is shared by many. Like what was happening at home as the pandemic hit, with my partner Mary, with my children, in my own sense of self and how I felt about what was going on in the world, and understanding that as I was going through that I really needed to show up in the best way possible as a leader to all of our team at LinkedIn, as so many of them were navigating difficult situations, and whether that be first and foremost what happened in China, and then Singapore on our team, and then Italy, and on a global basis. So I find that one of the greatest leadership challenges is being there for others when you yourself are going through difficulty. And I think I learned a lot about how to be mindful of where I was at any given time, and then with that strength, then use it to show up in the way that I wanted to for my team. I think also, maybe to Dan D's point, crisis, a big part of it's about prioritization and knowing, like, in this moment right now, what's the thing that matters? Because there's so much going on. And, if in the early days of the pandemic, you might have thought about 18 different things that you needed to address in the moment. But I think that when you go back to your culture and values as an organization and you say, what matters to us, what mattered was keeping people safe. So everything else, like, we needed to get to at some point, but all that mattered was making sure that our employees were safe, and they understood what was going on. We could bring some clarity during a time of uncertainty and chaos. And by, I think, having that clarity of priority during crisis, you can do your best job as a leader. And I think that was something that had helped me a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a phenomenal, both of you. And this leads me to, since you are talking about crisis and how to deal with this, Dan, your book, Greater Than Ever, does a phenomenal job at outlining New York's economic comeback in the 2000s, your experience as a deputy mayor, and also the Olympics, and overall some powerful lessons on optimism and resilience. So can you share, because there's so much wisdom here, but can you share here with the audience perhaps one of the greatest lessons and they can take with them, given a time like this?
Well, I'd say probably the greatest lesson was about failure, to be honest. As you mentioned, I actually conceived of and then led New York's bid to host the Olympics for 2012. And, I worked for 10 years on it, and we ultimately lost. In case anybody noticed, New York never actually hosted the Olympics. We lost to London. And, once America invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, it was pretty clear that in an international competition, we were not going to win. And so for the 2 years before, I thought there was a pretty good chance we were going to lose. And I dreaded actually losing, because I thought, everyone would think I was an idiot for spending all this time and money and everything. It was really hard to anticipate that. Well, eventually, we ended up losing. We ended up losing in Singapore, actually, which is where the decision was made. And I remember the entire flight back from Singapore, I was kind of dreading going into the office, showing my face on the street on the following Monday. And, I went into the office, got back to New York, went into the office. And the reality is nobody cared. And I learned at that moment the most valuable lesson you can actually learn. And this will sound a little harsh, and I don't mean it that way. But other than your close friends and family, nobody really thinks about you other than you. And it's not that they're callous. It's just they've got their own lives, and we obsess about ourselves. And when we obsess about ourselves and we obsess about loss, we become poorer risk takers. And having really gone through a very public loss, truly on a global scale, and recognizing that nobody cared, it allowed me to reframe that loss in a way that has been extremely beneficial to me. I became, as I said, a better risk taker, didn't care so much what other people think. That was liberating to me. And so really understanding that it's up to you. And by the way, what I also did was kind of reframe it in my own mind from being a loss to a victory, because out of the effort to host the Olympics, or to bid on hosting the Olympics, I developed a plan for the future of New York, which almost without exception was actually ended up happening. And so, the effort, instead of being a loss for the Olympics, was an effort to rethink New York, and giving myself the ability to actually do that not only liberated me, but also enabled me to see how, by taking smarter risks, the opportunities for success can come from maybe somewhat unexpected places. So that I think by far is the most important lesson that out of that entire experience. I'm really proud of what we achieved, and I think it established New York for at least a couple of decades. Now New York has to rethink itself all over again, probably in the wake of COVID.
Absolutely. And just one thing that you and I talked about it earlier is that everything happens perfectly. Even our failures, they're just part of the process, and the universe is always working for us. So
I really believe that, actually, but it's up to us to take advantage of that. Yes. And you talk about resilience, you talk about optimism. Look, you've got to be realistic on many levels, but you don't accomplish anything great without optimism and resilience, but also risk-taking. One of my favorite sayings, actually, Mike Bloomberg said it to me, and I repeated it to him after he dropped out of the presidential race last year. He said to me at one point, "Show me somebody who's never lost, and I'll show you a loser." Oh, wow. And what he meant was, look, you never get them all right, and if you don't take risk, you're never going to do anything really great.
Yeah. Wow. That's
cool.
Yeah, so cool and so inspiring, Dandy. I mean, I think that resilience and making it through things, I've experienced it my whole life. And so to hear, professionals, even at the level of yourself, speaking that truth as well, it's just very gratifying. I took a very intelligent risk. Taking intelligent risk is a part of our culture tenets at LinkedIn. So I've been at LinkedIn 8 years. It's embedded in my DNA now. Dan can attest to that. 21 years in the tech recruiting industry, and I took a big career shift, and just this year joined Inclusion Recruiting, focusing on our diversity, inclusion, and belonging. I'm grateful that LinkedIn had the opportunity. It was scary, and I came knowing engineering like the back of my hand to a new world, but I'm passionate about inclusivity in the workplace. Little did I know that there would be, social injustice in the world that would catapult and take a big leap in the beginning of the year. So with that came so many challenges, because I was now front and center of that. So many lessons in that. And then one of the main things is coming into a leader and experiencing this new world and being afraid, but taking that risk was, how do I pace myself? And how do I, just calm myself and know that I shouldn't know it all, but learn and grow as I'm taking this risk. So, yeah, and Greater Than Ever book, I can't wait to read it, add it to my bookshelf. Sounds so amazing. What about you, Dan S? What would you say, any greatest lessons you've learned from failures, or what I like to call setbacks?
Yeah, well, one of my luckiest days of my life was I was 8 years old, and I played on a youth soccer team with a bunch of friends in my neighborhood. And the goalie on our team didn't show up for the game. And my dad, the coach was looking for someone to put them in. And my dad said, how about Dan? He can try. And that was the beginning of, a decade of playing goalie at various levels of competition. And there's one thing you have to learn to be good at as a goalie is to get scored on and not care. You're going to get scored on a lot. And, the thing that, in many ways is required of you is to have it happen, quickly understand what's going on, and get back in the game, and to not have that impact you going forward. And I think about that as like a true molding of who I became as a person, that experience, like over that time, I've probably been scored on thousands of times, and I got up and, brushed myself off and quickly assessed what had happened and get ready again. Yeah. I think the trickiest parts are when, you get past the failure, you sort of decompose it, and you try to understand what happened and what you could have done differently in a very, sort of self-building way. And when you realize, like, sometimes what you did is you made a bad decision, or you knew you said something you shouldn't have, and all like, and you can quickly get through those. The hard part is when you realize that the failure stems from something that's like deeply rooted in who you are. And as you become a leader, I almost like to think that you're trying to unwind behaviors that you built up earlier and earlier in your life. Like sometimes you're like, wow, I've been doing that since I was 7. Yeah. Like this thing that impacted my ability to be successful in this moment. That's a long-standing life habit. Like I've been doing this forever. And it often comes down to when your intentions don't line up with how people receive you. And when you're, earlier in your career, like a lot of people that you work with, you have these like deep opportunities to build relationships with them. And so you might say something like, well, as people get to know me, they know what I mean. More become a leader, you don't have that opportunity. Like people have short, often, thin conversations with you, and they take a lot from those. And you don't have the luxury of deep relationship to make sure that what you mean is what's being received. And you realize that a lot of the habits you've been doing for a very long time are getting in the way of that connection between like true intention and being received in the right way. So, I continue to learn and try to get better at that, and build a fully aligned human being of what like is in my heart and in my head and in my actions is what manifests in the world. But it's a journey, and it's not something that anyone can possibly. It's almost like an art form, in that you never get there. You just get closer and closer to what you hope is your best self.
Oh, and I love what you meant when you mentioned that it's an alignment, it's a congruency with your heart and your mind and your actions. So, and thank you for saying that it's a process, because it gives us hope that there's no one that is perfect. We're all trying to get there to that alignment. So thank you, Dan. So I have another question that I'm actually very interested in this question, like, especially this year, it has tested us. I have felt it. I always felt so confident as a leader, and suddenly I felt like things just took me off the loop. So what did you learn the hard way in 2020? Dan Doctoroff, let's start with you, and then we'll pass it on to Dan Shapero.
Yeah, look, I think that the importance of empathy, and I think Dan Shapero kind of alluded to this before. It's very easy not to have to be empathetic all the time, particularly when you're in a leadership position. You're pulled in so many different directions. We focused a lot on inclusion at Sidewalk Labs, and for us, it's a journey. We're learning. I think we're getting better. What occurred to me was that in many ways, COVID and our response to COVID was in some ways sort of the most powerful exercise in inclusion that we could possibly have, because it affected everybody in such different ways. Whether you had kids, what your living situation was, the specific job that you were in, whether people actually had parents who were healthcare workers or siblings who had healthcare workers. And if our goal is to enable people to be their authentic selves and be their best selves, and we have to accommodate all of these different things in a crisis environment, the need for empathy is just so much greater. And yet at the same time, how do you balance that need for empathy with the need to keep moving things forward? And so, for me, I think what I learned was to really sort of analyze sort of how empathetic I'm being at all times in order to actually care for people at a larger group as individuals, while at the same time moving the group forward.
Thank you, Dan. Dan Shapero.
I think all of 2020 felt like the hard way. So I think that in a lot of ways, it's hard to say what was the the hard way part of the year. And two things come to mind. The first is that oftentimes people will ask you, how do you feel? And I felt a lot of different things. I felt scared. I felt proud of work I was doing. I felt tired but optimistic. I felt sad about things that I was, missing in my life that I love, but then appreciating that I had so much more than many other people that were going through harder difficulty than me. And I think that I learned that it's okay to feel all of those things at once. I'm not sure I totally appreciated the idea of having a pluralistic, emotional state as a human being in the way that I felt in this year, and that you shouldn't really try to clarify how you feel about something, and to almost just accept that all of these things are a natural part of what you're going through. And I think that was really helpful for me. Maybe on a harder note, we often talk about, being tired and you sort of run out of attention or energy in a day. I didn't realize I could run out of emotional energy. And the way it manifested for me was that I would spend my day in really tough situations with our team and trying to help make decisions that were hard, that were very emotionally centered. And then I would be too tired to be emotionally present for my family at night, because my kids were going through so much and my partner was going through so much. And I didn't really realize that I could be emotionally juiced, and that there was only so much I could personally carry in a day. And I had to wind up actually managing it very deliberately, because I could end my day totally exhausted and not be there with my 9-year-old who was missing his best friend. And so learning how to be conscious of that and learning that was something I needed to do was hard.
Yeah. Thank you both. There's a couple of things that stand out to me the most. Dan Doctoroff, you said, is balancing the compassion and empathy and keep the business going, moving forward. Definitely so important to understand what that balance is, and we don't necessarily get it right from the start. And second, Dan Shapero, thank you for making us feel normal, because I have felt all of these: scared, tired. Sometimes I think I have it right, and then I realize I don't. And thank you, because for all of us who are listening, it gives us permission to feel that it's okay to feel all of this.
And if I might add something, this is a big leadership lesson for me this year. I used to think that leaders needed to have answers, or at least say something smart when asked a question, right? And that was probably an earlier in my career belief about what leadership looked like. And I think perhaps more than anything in this pandemic, I've gotten some of the most appreciation and connection with my team when I just share, on LinkedIn, here's how I'm feeling right now. And if you're feeling this way too, we're going through this together. And I, talked about it in moments where people were starting to really apologize for when their kids would come on Zoom, or on Teams, and they felt nervous about it. And I was like, I'm in the same situation. Like that door, my daughter walks through all the time, and like that's how life is right now. Or what happened in Washington, D.C. And like, I didn't even know how I felt about the situation because it was happening so quickly. And just to highlight, hey, if you're feeling that way too, it's okay. Like that's what we're all going through. Just bringing visibility to your own emotional state. Like a lot of other people are probably feeling what you're feeling. And that's just part of being human. So I didn't get that as a leader, I think, until this year, how powerful that could be as a way to come together.
Yeah, I agree. I think the acknowledgement of uncertainty among leaders, among everybody, is just really important. I mean, we're in unprecedented times. Obviously, COVID's had an impact on our workplaces and the work we're doing. But if you think about what we have lived through, even obviously health risks, but the political situation, Black Lives Matter this week or this year. I mean, literally, we are living through. I'm 62 years old, and this is by far the most fraught period in my lifetime. I would argue, in many ways, certainly since the Depression, and maybe since before the Civil War. And we're all unsure about how to think about so many different things at the same time, and that's okay. We don't have the answers. The answers probably won't be revealed, but what is important is to be able to talk about it. What's also important is to enable everybody, to the extent possible, to have a voice through this, because everybody does need to talk about what they're feeling.
Yeah. Big plus one. Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I go back to, Dan, as what you said about just letting your emotions be. And, for a long time also, I felt like, I'm a mother of four and I'm a leader in this organization and I need to show up and puff up my chest and be the one that holds the strength together. But then I ignored my own emotions as I was going through them. And so that letting them be and aware they're there. And when I needed to cry, when I need time alone, have that time alone. And even in the workforce, when I'm meeting with the team and we start a meeting and you ask, how's everyone doing? And someone's not doing well, and stopping the flow of that meeting just to have a natural, mindful conversation about, we're not doing well. And the whole topic of the business was not there anymore because we gave that moment to ourselves. And that made us stronger, and I both for myself as a leader and for the team. So really appreciate just being aware and conscious that we're all going through this, and giving us that space, is so important. Yeah.
And Lonnie, maybe to just give you a kudos, like I think that there's something really positive in the world going on right now of a redefinition of what strong looks like.
Yeah.
Like strong is manifesting your emotions. Strong is being able to be clear on what you think and like true to like what you feel. And like this is what people love about you in so many ways, is that it's so clear that you are like being you.
Yeah.
and people love that. That's what strong is becoming. And I think that's so positive. It's so different than what I think I grew up with. Like, what does strong look like on TV? Like, sort of stoic or something like that. But like, I think there's something really beautiful happening around like a new definition of strength.
Well, thank you, Dan. Yes, and that, it's so true. And I never thought that I'd be appreciated for fully being Lonnie, or loud, boisterous, and somewhat talk too much self. But I'm appreciating it very much. Yeah. So, Dan D, when we think about this and, all of what we're having to do with the challenges, we go back to our roles as leaders and as professionals, right? And so one of the questions I have is, what are some ways that you've had to approach leadership to get things done in the business side? What has changed? Is there any different approach that you've taken this year? Start with Andy.
I don't know if it's this year or it's been a evolution for me. Sidewalk's still a startup. It's a relatively small company. We do a lot of different things. I come from running very large organizations, and I think I've had to learn to really listen dramatically better than I probably had in the past. I've learned, I think, to spread authority, so I'm not the final decision maker on a lot of things. And what I have seen is that by doing that, I think people have really responded and taken a responsibility that I should have really delegated a long time ago. I think part of that is COVID related because we aren't in one place. I think part of it is just me kind of growing and recognizing that even at more than 60 years old, you can still grow. And sometimes events force it on us and accelerate it. But what we all have to be, and we kind of touched on this before, is the most valuable attribute we can have or we can see in other people, I think, is a high degree of self-awareness. And we've got to keep learning about ourselves. And during this period, we've been forced to do that, I think, even more, which I think will be a long-term good that comes out of this.
Yeah. And Dan, you said that there is a great degree of self-awareness. So with that said, I have an important question now that we're coming to, almost the end of the show. And then after that, we'll ask a couple of questions from the audience. But so that sense of self-awareness, where do you go for to draw inspiration from, or wisdom, or for inner guidance? Where do you go for this?
Well, I think there's inner guidance, but I think really once you get over the hump of the barrier of having to think that you're going to be right all the time or perfect all the time, it is getting feedback from other people. If you open up, people are going to open up to you. And I've struggled with that in the past. I don't like negative feedback. I prefer to rely on myself, and it's hard forcing myself to do that. But the people who care about you, the people who need you, if you open up to them, are going to give you the kind of feedback that you need. We do it as a company through surveys and other things, which often reveal things that are unpleasant to hear, but you got to hear them and then you got to respond to them. So, in terms of kind of a natural inclination toward self-awareness, I think that is something, Dan talked about how he was influenced, by being thrown into the goal at 8 years old. There are all these little things that have formed us. And I have been on, I think, a journey to try and understand what are those things that have formed me. Because those things that I might not even be as conscious of are the things that are the hardest to change. And you only do that by really digging into yourself, with the help of outside help, with your closest family and friends, to try and truly understand what motivates you.
Thank you, Dan. And then same question for Dan Shapero. What is your guiding light?
Oh, guiding light. Well, that's a deep question. I think, to Dan D's, I'm going to forever call you Dan D, I think. To Dan D's point, I'm a huge believer in self-awareness as a core leadership skill. And, as you become more senior, the feedback gets quieter and less frequent. And, one of the things I like to tell new managers is new managers tell bad jokes, because the next time you're going to tell a joke, everyone's going to laugh and you're going to think you're really funny. And guess what? You're not any more funny than you were the day before you were a manager. So, but if I think about moments where I've done things that didn't work out the way I wanted, and I look back in time, people had given me hints and I just wasn't tuned into them. And so for me, wisdom is everywhere. The issue is that we're not usually listening. And so I think it is, I'm at my best when I'm curious about the little things people tell me that part of me wants to move past. But I'm like, wow, they took the time and maybe in their minds the risk to put that on the table, quietly and gently. And there's something in there. I just got to find it, it is very rare that I think about something where I could have done a much better job, but someone had not at some point attempted to steer me in the right direction. But I perhaps didn't see it in the moment at that way.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. So I want us now to take a couple of minutes or so to see if we can take a couple of questions from the audience. We can see the questions coming in from the live stream. So Lonnie, if you have one question in particular that you want to ask, I'll let you have the next question, then I'll ask the last one.
Yes. Okay. Right. Wisdom is everywhere. The issue is we're not always listening. I'm taking that one with me, Dan. That was a good one, Dennis. Question from Oscar Ridman. The question is, how do you measure success or traction in a time of crisis? What is most important? And what is the evidence you are looking for? Let's go, Dan D.
Yeah, I mean, look, we all kind of have goals that we have over the course of a year. And, when COVID hit, we redefined those goals. And, still the need to achieve things is important. You just got to make sure that you're realistic about kind of whatever you defined as success or progress. The fact that we're in a really unusual time doesn't mean that you stop trying to define what success or what goals actually should be. And when you hit them, you think you've generally been successful. What's important is that you've engaged in a process that is consensual, that you've taken the best advice you can on what is actually realistic or a stretch from realistic. And that people buy into it.
Yeah, absolutely. What is realistic? Very good. Thank you, Oscar Redmond, for the question. Veronica, you want to take the next one?
Yeah. So there are a couple of one here that are pretty interesting. Jane said, "How do you keep empathy towards others in check while in a leadership position?" Why don't we have? Yeah, Dan Shapero.
It's an interesting question. So. One of the things I learned from our prior CEO, Jeff Weiner, is the difference between empathy and compassion. Empathy is when you feel things that others are feeling. And compassion is when you understand what other people are going through and you can visualize it, but you're also separated from it such that you can act on it, that the emotional state of the empathy is not getting in the way of your ability to help. And I think that there is no limit to the power of compassion, but we need to be careful that we're not feeling what others are going through because it gets in the way of us actually helping them through whatever means we have, whatever agency we have. So I, as a leader, try to be as compassionate as possible and to ensure that in every decision that we make, the understanding of what others are going through is front and center in my own mind to make the best decision possible. And for me, the guiding principles of making those kinds of decisions is the culture and values of the company that you're part of or the organization you're part of. And so at LinkedIn, being transparent, being members first. We have these disciplines of what it means to operate in a LinkedIn way, and for me, that is my guiding principle.
That's great. So, with that said, I just want to ask you to leave the audience with some words of wisdom. What do you want to leave the audience with? And let me start with Dan Doctoroff, someone who I hold so dear. And a magnificent human being, and afterwards, and also Dan Shapero, who's so beloved here at LinkedIn. Dan Doctoroff, why don't you leave us with your final words?
Well, I think we've touched on it in a way. I think it's really important to live by a set of values and principles. I think you need to be very clear about them, and whether that's as an individual, as a company, whatever, and using them on an ongoing basis to check yourself and to make sure you're living up to them. It's hard work. You don't ever get to where you need to be, but using them as sort of that reference point for how you live your life and how you run your company is really critical.
Thank you, Dan.
And for me, first of all, I would advise everyone to tune into the show as it continues, because you have some amazing hosts here and your thoughtfulness around the topics. So tune into the next show. I'm excited to do so as well. The second thing is just, there's this metaphor that I love in difficult times called the crucible. And the crucible is this, think of it as a cauldron where you take molten iron and you heat it to incredible temperatures under enormous pressure. And by virtue of that process, you turn it into steel. Now, if you imagine, the hardest moments in your life or in your work or your personal situation, like in those moments, it feels intense and hot and hard. But I think if we reflect back on them in the past, they are often the moments that we grow the most from. Even though it doesn't feel good in the moment, it never feels good to be in the crucible. But sometimes I find personally that being conscious of the fact that even though it's hard, it is these moments that cause me to grow, helps me get through them. And I think we are in these moments right now. And so it's not going to make it any easier for the time being, but it might give everyone a sense of understanding of how this process will almost certainly lead to them growing as a human being.
My goodness, Lonnie. I mean, this has been, how can you even describe this show and the amazing work of wisdom that we received today from these two phenomenal leaders?
Awesome energy, great experience. Thank you both. It's been amazing. And thank you, Veronica.
Thank you. You are so amazing. So thank you for blessing us with your presence today. And the audience, please post your comments and let them know how much you love them and you love this message. Thank you again and have a wonderful week, everyone. Thank you for joining 30 Minutes of Wisdom.
Thanks, Veronica. Bye, Dan.
Bye.
Take care.